but favorite paranormal teen romance novel. We left off finishing chapter 10, and so we're gonna start on 11, if I can find it. There you go. Welcome. Enjoy, or don't enjoy. Fall asleep, do what you must. Chapter 11. The Sunday before school was scheduled to start. Dee took me into town to pick up notebooks while she replaced almost everything she used for school with a new item. We had 3 more days of vacation, and then we had Labor Day. I was already yearning for it. Before we headed home, Dee was hungry as usual, and we stopped at one of her favorite places. It's quite a quaint restaurant, I said. Dee smirked, her sandaled foot continuously tapping. Quaint? It would be quaint to a big city gal like you, but it's the place to be here. I stole another quick glance around. The smoke hole diner wasn't bad. It was actually kind of cute in an earthy drive-home way. And I did like the clusters of rocks and stones that jutted out around the table's edge. It's a lot busier in the evening and after school, she added between sips. It's hard to get a seat then. You come here often? I found it kind of hard to imagine beautiful Dee hanging out here, eating hot turkey sandwiches and drinking milkshakes. But there she was, on her second hot turkey sandwich and a third milkshake. Ever since I met Dee, I'd been constantly amazed of the amount of food she could consume in one sitting. It was actually a little disturbing. Damon and I come here at least once a week for their lasagna. It is to die for. Her eyes lit up with a mixture of excitement and longing. I laughed. You must love their food. But thanks for inviting me out today. I'm glad to get out of the house since Mum is home. She's been hovering over me every second she's there. She's worried. I nodded, toying with my straw. Especially after news broke about the girl who died the same night. Did you know her? Dee looked down at her plate, shaking her head. Not very well. She was in a grade lower than us. A lot of people knew her. Small town and all. I thought I read they weren't sure if she was murdered, that it looked like a heart attack. She paused. Her lips pursed as they looked over my shoulder. Strange. What? I asked, turning to see what she was looking at, and turned back around to face her as fast as I could. It was Damon. Dee's head was cocked to the side, her dark hair falling carelessly around her. I didn't know he would be here. Oh man, it's he who shall not be named. Laughter erupted from Dee, drawing attention from everyone in the diner. Ah, that was funny. I sunk in my seat. After the morning he and his sister made me breakfast, he'd avoided me, and that was fine. I had wanted to thank him for sort of saving my life. A proper thank you that didn't end in insults, but the few times I've been able to catch him, he stopped only long enough to give me a look that warned me not to even think about approaching him. Damon might be the most physically flawless male I've ever seen. His face was something that any artist would die to get a chance to sit and sketch. No light reflected badly off him. But he was also the biggest jerk on the planet. He's not going to come over here, right? I whispered to Dee, who suddenly looked very amused. Hello, sis. I sucked in a deep breath at the sound of his husky voice. I slid my bandaged arm under the table. I was positive if he saw it, it would remind him of how inconveniencing I'd been. Hey there, Dee said as she rested her chin on her hand. What are you doing here today? I'm hungry, he replied dryly. This is where people come to eat, isn't it? I stared very intently at my half-eaten burger and fries, moving them around on my plate, praying to whoever was listening that I could fade into the rusty-coloured booze until he left. I forced myself to think about anything: books, television shows, movies, Damon, the grass outside. That is, except you, who must come here to play with her food. Oh, damn it. I plastered the brightest smile I could muster and steeled myself. My smile faltered the instant I met his eyes. He looked at me expectantly, as if he knew I was really thinking, wanting to fight back. Yeah, see, my mum normally takes me out to Chuck E. Cheese for dinner, so I'm a little out of my element, missing the ball pen and all. Dee nodded and looked up at her brother. Isn't she great? Just lovely. He crossed his arms, his tone as dry as ever. How's your arm? His question took me off guard. My arm actually felt fine. I wanted the splint off, but my mum refused to let me even shower without it. It's better. It's okay. Thank you. Don't. He cut me off, running a hand through a mess of black waves. Your face looks a lot better, by the way. I subconsciously placed a hand on my cheek. Well, thanks, I think. I looked at Dee with disbelief and mouthed the words, my face, to her. She exchanged an amused look with me before turning back to her brother. Are you going to join us? We were just about finished. It was Damon's turn to snort. No, thank you. I returned to poking my food around on my plate, as if the idea of eating with us was the most absurd thing. Well, that's too bad. Dee didn't miss a beat. Damon, you're here already. I glanced up at the sound. Oh, Damon, you're here already. I glanced up at the sound of a very excited female, a small, pretty blonde, waved from the main entrance. Damon waved back, not as joyously, and I watched as she practically bounced over to our table. When she reached Damon, she stretched up and gave him a quick kiss on the cheek before wrapping a possessive arm around his. An ugly, hot feeling unfurled in my belly. He had a girlfriend? I glanced at Dee. His sister didn't look happy. The girl finally looked down at our table. Hey, Dee, how are you doing? Dee returned her smile, with a very tight one. Great, Ash. How have you been? I've been really good. She nudged Damon as if that was a private joke between the two of them. It means they did it. I couldn't breathe. I thought you were leaving again, Dee asked, her usually warm eyes turning sharp. With your brothers and coming back to when school starts. Changed my mind. She glanced up at Damon again, who was beginning to shift uncomfortably. Interesting, Dee responded, her expression taking on a very cat-like quality. Oh, how rude of me, Ash. This is Katie. She gestured over at me. She's new to our exciting little town. I forced myself to smile at the girl. I had no reason to be jealous or to care. But damn, this girl was pretty. Ash's smile faded. She took a step back. This is her? My eyes darted to Dee. I can't do this, Damon. Maybe you guys can be okay with this, but I'm not. Ash tossed her blonde hair back with a tan hand. This is wrong. Damon sighed. Ash. Her full lips thinned. No. Ash, you don't even know her. Dee came to her feet. You're being ridiculous. The traffic in the diner literally stopped. Everyone stared. I felt heat, a mixture of embarrassment and anger, creep across my face as I stared at Ash. I'm sorry, but did I do something? Ash's extraordinary, bright blue eyes fixed on me. Yeah, how about breathing for starters? Excuse me, I said. You heard me, Ash snapped. She turned to Damon. Is this why everything is going to shit in a handbasket? Why my brothers are running around the country? That's enough. Damon grabbed Ash's hand. There's a McDonald's down the street. We'll get you a Happy Meal. Maybe that'll make you happier. What's going to shit? I demanded. Oh, sorry, she demanded it, so what's going to shit? The urge to get up and rip out her hair was hard to ignore. Ash's glare burned into me like twin lasers. Everything is going to shit. While this was fun, Damon cocked a brow at his sister. I'll see you at home. I watched them leave, boiling with anger, but under that anger was also hurt. Dee plopped back in the seat. Oh my god, I'm sorry. She's a complete bitch. I looked at her as my hand shook. Why did she say those things to me? I don't know. She might be jealous. Dee toyed with her straw, not meeting my eyes. Ash has a thing for Damon. Always had. They used to date. My brain got hung up on the words used to for a second. Anyway, she heard about him coming to your rescue that night. Of course she's going to hate you. Are you serious? I didn't believe her. All of that because Damon saved me from being killed? Frustrated, I slammed my splint down on the table and winced. And Damon treats me like I'm a total terrorist. Ridiculous. He doesn't hate you, she replied quietly. I think he wants to be honest, but he doesn't. That's why he acts like that. That made no sense to me. Why would he want to hate me? I don't want to hate him, but he makes it hard not to. Dee glanced up, her eyes full of tears. Kat, I'm sorry. My family is a little weird. So is this town. So is Ash. See, her family is a friend of our family, and all of us have a lot in common. Hi. Sorry, I'm just getting real relaxed here. Gotta put my feet up. I stared at her, waiting for her to explain how in the hell that anything that had anything to do with Ash's bitchiness. They're triplets, you know. Dee sat back against the booth, staring listlessly at her plate. She has 2 brothers, Adam and Andrew. That's weird. Both my ex's names were Adam and Andrew. Wait. I gaped at her. You're telling me there is a set of triplets here, and you guys are twins? Her face scrunched up as she nodded. In a town with a population of like 500? I know, it's weird, she said, glancing up, but we do have it in common, and all of us are kind of tight-knit. Small towns don't do well with weird, and I'm sort of dating her brother Adam. I gaped. You have a boyfriend? When she nodded, I shook my head. You never mentioned him before. She shrugged, looking away. It's not something I thought about bringing up. We don't see each other a lot. I clamped my mouth shut. What girl doesn't talk about her boyfriend? If I had one, I'd talk about him. At least mention him once, maybe twice. I stared at Dee with new eyes, wondering how much more she wasn't telling me. Sitting back, my gaze drifted beyond Dee, and it was like a switch being thrown. I started noticing things. Little things. Like how the redhead waitress with the pencil stuck in her bun kept glancing over at me and touching the skinny black gemstone on her necklace. And then there was the old man sitting at the bar, food untouched, staring at us, while muttering under his breath. He looked a bit crazy. My eyes flitted around the diner. A lady in a business suit caught my eye. She sneered and turned back to her companion. He glanced over his shoulder, and his face paled. Quickly, I turned back to Dee. She looked oblivious to it all, or maybe she was trying real hard to ignore it. Tension clouded the air. It was like an invisible line had been drawn somewhere, and I'd skipped right over it. I could feel all of them, dozens of eyes, settling on me. All of their gazes filled with distrust and an emotion far, far worse. Fear. Hi, Martin. Good morning. The last thing I wanted to be wearing was a splint on my first day at a new school. But since my mum was insistent that I'd wait until my checkup tomorrow after school, I was stuck with more than the "look, a new girl" reactions I got the moment I stepped into the hall of PHS. I had those looks, plus, "look, a new girl who's been beaten up," too. Everyone stared as if I were a 2-headed alien rolling up into school. I wasn't sure if I should feel like a celebrity or an escaped mental patient. No one spoke to me. Luckily, PHS was easy to navigate and find classes. I was used to high schools that were at least 4 stories tall, had multiple wings, and open campuses. PHS had a couple of floors, but that was it. I found my homeroom class easily and sat through the curious stares and few tentative smiles. I didn't see my neighbors until second period, and it was Damon who strolled in seconds before the bell rang, with an easy smile on his full lips. Conversations practically ceased. Several of the girls around me even stopped scribbling in or on their notebooks. Damon had a sort of rock star entrance with that deadly swagger. He had everyone's attention, especially when he shifted his trig book from one hand to another, then ran his fingers through the tousled waves of his thick hair, letting it fall back over his forehead. His jeans hung low on his hips, so when he lifted his arms, he flashed a row of golden skin that somehow made math all the more interesting. Oh, math! A girl with reddish hair sighed next to me and said under her breath, "God, what I wouldn't do for a piece of that." "A Damon sandwich would be on the menu." Another girl giggled. That is terrible." "Along with the Thompson twins as a side dish," the redhead replied, flushing as he drew close. "Lisa, you're such a hoe bag," laughed the brunette. I hastily averted my eyes to my notebook, but I still knew He'd taken the seat directly behind me. The entire length of my back tingled. A second later, I felt something poke me in the back. Oh. Biting down on my lip, I glanced over my shoulder. His smile was lopsided. How's the arm, kitty cat? Excitement and dread warred through me. Did he ride on my back? I wouldn't be surprised if he had. I felt my cheeks redden at the sparkle of his green eyes. Good, I said, tucking my hair back. I'll get the splint off tomorrow, I think. Damon tapped his pen on the edge of the desk. That should help. Help with what? He circled the pen in the air, apparently encompassing my fashion sense. With what you've got going on here. My eyes narrowed. I didn't even want to know what he was referencing. There was nothing wrong with my jeans or my shirt. I looked like everyone else in the classroom, with the exception of kids who had their shirts tucked into their pants. That's me right now. I have my shirt tucked into my pants. I'm not even kidding. I hadn't seen the cowboy hat or teased bangs yet. These kids look like the kids in Florida, just with less potential for skin cancer. Lisa and her friend stopped talking, watching Damon and me with open-mouthed stares. I swore to God, if Damon said anything ignorant, I was going to lay him out in the class. My splint was heavy enough to do damage. Leaning forward, his warm breath danced along my cheek when he spoke. Less people will stare without the splint, is all I'm saying. I didn't believe for 1 second that was all he was talking about. On top of that, with him this close to my face, everyone was staring. And we weren't looking away from each other. We were stuck in the middle of an epic stare down I refused to lose. Something passed between us, reminiscent of the strange current I'd felt with him before. A boy on the other side of Damon gave a low whistle. Ash is gonna kick your ass, Damon. Damon's grin went up a notch. Nah, she likes my ass too much for that. The boy chuckled. Eyes still on me, he tipped his desk forward even further. Guess what? What? I checked out your blog. Oh dear baby Jesus, how did he find it? Wait, more importantly was the fact that he had found it. Was my blog now Googleable? That was, oh no, that was awesome sauce with an extra helping of sauce. Stalking me again, I see. Do I need to get a restraining order? In your dreams, kitten, he smirked. Oh wait, I'm already staring in those, aren't I? I rolled my eyes. Nightmares, Damon, nightmares. He smiled, his eyes twinkling, and I almost smiled back. But luckily, the teacher started calling roll, forcing an end to, well, whatever was going on between us. I turned around in my seat. Oh, God. I turned around in my seat, letting out a slow breath. My foot just slipped. Damon laughed softly. When the bell rang, signaling the end of class, I couldn't get out of there quick enough. I did so without looking back to see what Damon was doing. Math was going to suck butt more than it normally did if he sat behind me in class every day. Out in the hallway, Lisa and her friend fell in step with me. You're new here, said the brunette, observant. Lisa rolled her eyes. That's not obvious, Carissa. Carissa ignored her friend, pushing her square-framed glasses up her nose as she deftly stepped out of the way of another stupid kid barreling through the crowded hall. How do you know Damon Black so well? Considering the first kids to talk to me were doing so because I'd been talking to Damon, I wasn't thrilled. I moved in next door to them in the middle of July. Ah, I'm jealous. Lisa pursed her lips. Half the population at this school would love to trade places with you. I'd gladly change positions with them. By the way, my name is Carissa, and that's Lisa, if you hadn't figured it out yet. We've lived here our whole lives. Carissa waited. My name is Katie Schwartz, from Florida. Oddly, they didn't have thick accents like I'd been expecting. You came here to West Virginia. You came here to West Virginia. From Florida? Lisa's eyes went wide. Are you insane? I smiled. My mum is. What happened to your arm? Carissa asked as they followed me up the crowded stairs. There were so many people in the stairwell, I didn't want to announce what happened, but Lisa apparently knew. She was mugged in town, remember? She nudged Carissa with a curvy hip. The same night Sarah Butler died. Oh yeah, Carissa said, frowning. They're holding a memorial for her tomorrow during the pep rally. So sad. Unsure of how to respond, I nodded. Lisa smiled as we reached the second floor. I had English at the end of the hall, and I was pretty sure I shared it with Dee. Well, it's nice meeting you. We don't get a lot of new people here. Nope, Carissa agreed. No new kids since the triplets arrived here when we were freshmen. You mean Ash and her brothers? I asked, confused. And the Blacks, Lisa answered. All 6 of them showed up within days of each other. Had the entire school going crazy. Wait. I stopped in the middle of the hall, earning a few nasty looks from people I knocked off course. What do you mean, all 6 of them? All of them came here at the same time? Pretty much, Carissa said, fixing her glasses. And Lisa isn't kidding. It was crazy for months afterwards. Can you blame us, though? Lisa stopped by a classroom door, brow wrinkling. Oh, you didn't know that there'd been 3 of the Blacks? Feeling more confused, I shook my head. No, there's Damon and Dee, right? The warning bell rang, and both Lisa and Carissa glanced into the classroom filling up. It was Lisa who explained. They're triplets too. Dee and there were 2 brothers, Damon and Dawson. They were completely identical, like the 2 Thompson boys. Couldn't tell them apart if your life depended on it. I stared at them, rooted to the floor. Carissa smiled sadly. It's really sad. The one brother, Dawson, he disappeared a year ago. Everyone pretty much believes he's dead. Chapter 12. You have a very nice voice to listen to when you're high as a kite. My goodness. I didn't have much time to ask Dee about this other brother, his, in English AP because I was getting late to class. That was completely dyslexic. I was late getting to class. And I was still too hurt to broach the topic with her. I couldn't believe they had another brother and never once mentioned him, or mentioned their parents, their significant others, or what they do when they take a day off, when they take off for a day or 2. He disappeared, died, my heart ached for them, and though they obviously hadn't told me everything, I knew what it was like to lose someone. On top of that, there was something just flat out odd about the fact that 2 different families, with triplets, moved to the same small town in a matter of days. But Dee had said that the Thompsons were friends of the family. Maybe it was planned. After class, Dee was waylaid by Ash and a golden-haired boy who looked as though he could be a model. It took no stretch of the imagination to figure out that he was one of her brothers. And when they'd left her, all Dee said was to meet together at lunch before we had to rush off to our next class. Bio was my next class, and Lisa was in that one. She sat at the table in front of me, smiling. How's your first day going? Good. Normal. Normal with the exception of everything I'd learned. Yours? Boring and long already, she replied. I can't wait for the school year to be over. I'm ready to get the hell out of Dodge, move to a normal town. A normal town? I laughed. Lisa leaned back, placing her arms on my table. This town is the epicenter of weirdness. Some of the people here, well, they don't act right. A 3-fingered hillbilly danced in my head, but somehow I doubted that's what she meant. Dee said some of the people around here weren't friendly. She snickered. She'd say that. I frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Her eyes widened, and she shook her head. I don't mean that as a bad thing, but some of the kids here and the folks in town aren't friendly toward her, and others like her. Others like her? I said slowly. I'm not sure what that means. Me either, Lisa shrugged. Like I said, people are weird around here. This town is weird. People are always claiming to see men in black running around, like black suits, not the actors. I think they're government. I've actually seen them myself. Then there's the other things people claim to see. I remember the guy at the grocery store. Like what? Grinning, Lisa glanced toward the front of the room. The teacher hadn't arrived yet. She scooted even closer and lowered her voice to a whisper. Okay, this is going to sound insane. And let's get one thing straight. I don't believe any of this crap, okay? This sounded juicy. Okay. Her dark eyes twinkled. People around here have claimed they've seen forms of light up near Seneca Rocks, like these people-shaped things of light. Some believe they're ghosts or aliens. Aliens? I busted out laughing, drawing a few stares. I'm sorry, but seriously? Seriously, she repeated, grinning. I don't believe it. But we actually get traffic around here from people looking for evidence. I kid you not, we're like Point Pleasant around here. You're going to have to fill me in on that. You ever heard of Mothman? When she saw my look, she laughed. It's another crazy thing about this flying giant dragonfly that warns people before something bad happens. Up in Point Pleasant, some have reported seeing it before the bridge collapsed and killed a bunch of people. And days before that, they saw men in suits hanging around. I opened my mouth to respond, but our teacher walked in. At first, I didn't recognize him. His light brown hair was styled back from his forehead. His polo was pressed, nothing like the worn short and jeans I'd last seen him in. Matthew was Mr. Garrison, my bio teacher, the same guy who'd been at Damon's house when we returned from the lake. He picked papers off his desk and looked up, his gaze scanning the class. His eyes landed on me, and I felt the blood drain from my face. Are you okay? Whispered Lisa. Mr. Garrison held my gaze a second longer, then looked away. I let out a breath I was holding. Yeah, I whispered, swallowing thickly. I'm okay. I sat back in my chair, staring ahead blankly while Mr. Garrison launched right into class, going over our course material and the labs we'd been participating in. The obligatory animal autopsy was scheduled, much to my dismay. The idea of cutting into animals, dead or not, gave me the creeps. But not as badly as the creeps Mr. Garrison gave me. Throughout class, I'd feel his concentrated gaze on me, and it was as if he was seeing right through me. What the hell was going on around here? The school cafeteria was near the gymnasium, a long and rectangular shape that smelled of overcooked food and disinfectant. Yum. White tables filled the room, and most of them were already occupied by the time I got there. Standing in line, I recognized Carissa. She turned, spotted me, and smiled. Spaghetti on the menu, or at least what they consider spaghetti. Grimacing, I plopped some on my tray. It doesn't look too bad. Not after you've seen the meatloaf, she added noodles to her plate along with a side of salad. Then she picked up her drink. I know chocolate milk and spaghetti do not go together. They don't. No, they don't, I giggled, grabbing a bottle of water. Do they allow anyone off campus to eat? No, but they don't stop us when we do. Carissa handed a few dollars to the lunch lady, then turned to me. You have anyone to sit with? Forking over cash, I nodded. Yeah, I'm sitting with Dee. You? What? She said. I looked up. Carissa stared at me, open-mouthed. I'm sitting with Dee. I'm sure you can sit. No, I can't. Carissa grabbed my arm and pulled me out of the line. I arched a brow. Really? Why? Are they social lepers or something? She pushed her glasses up her nose, and as she rolled her eyes. No, they're pretty cool and all, but the last girl to do so, disappeared. Knots formed in my stomach as I let out a nervous laugh. You're kidding, right? No, she said solemnly. She disappeared around the same time as their brother did. I couldn't believe it. What else am I going to find out? Aliens, Men in Black, the Mothman, the Tooth Fairy was real? Carissa glanced over at a table full of friends. A few seats were open. Her name was Bethany Williams. She transferred to this school in the middle of her sophomore year, a little after they got here. She tipped her head to the back of the cafeteria, and she struck up a relationship with Dawson, and they both disappeared around the start of junior year. Why did that name sound familiar? Did it matter? There was so much I didn't know about Dee. Anyway, do you want to sit with us? Carissa asked. I shook my head, feeling bad for turning down her offer. I promised Dee I would sit with her today. Carissa relented with a weak smile. Well, then maybe tomorrow. Yes, I smiled. Tomorrow, definitely. Readjusting my book bag, I took the plate of food toward the back of the cafeteria. I saw Dee immediately. She was chatting with one of the Thompson brothers while she twisted her midnight hair around her finger. Across from the one golden-haired god that was another with his back to me, half sitting on the table. I wondered which one was her kind of boyfriend. The table was full except for 2 open spaces. All guys except Dee. Then I saw Ash's ultra-shiny cap of blonde hair from behind the boy on the table. Oddly enough, she was sitting higher than everyone else. A moment later, I realized why. She was sitting on Damon's lap. Her arms were draped around his neck, and I watched her press her chest right up against him, smiling at what he said. Hadn't he tried to kiss me on the porch? I was pretty sure I hadn't imagined that. Damon was a douchebag to the highest order. Katie! Dee exclaimed. Everyone at the table looked up. Even the one twin turned in his seat. His sky-blue eyes widened upon seeing me. The other twin sat back, folding his arms. The scowl on his face was a work of art. Sit, Dee said, smacking the top of the table across from her. We were just talking about... Wait, Ash said. Her red painted lips twisted into a pout. You did not invite her to sit with us. Really? The knots returned in full force, rendering me speechless. Shut up, Ash, grumbled the twin that had turned around. You're going to make a scene. I'm not going to make anything happen. Her arm around Damon's neck tightened. She doesn't need to sit with us. Dee sighed. Ash, stop being a bitch. She's not trying to steal Damon from you. My cheeks flamed as I stood there awkwardly. Anger rolled off Ash in waves, spreading across the table, smacking into me. That's not what I'm worried about, Ash snickered, her gaze drifting over me as a lip curled. For real. The longer I stood there, the stupider I felt. My eyes bounced from Dee to Damon, but he was looking over Ash's shoulder, his jaw working. Just sit, Dee said, motioning me forward. She'll get over it. I started to put my plate down. Damon whispered, and Ash smacked his arm. Not lightly either. He pressed his cheek into her neck, and that dark and unwanted feeling sprung up. Deep inside me, I dragged my eyes away from them, focusing on Dee. I don't know if I should. You shouldn't, Ash snapped. Shut up, Dee said. And then to me, she said sweetly, I'm sorry. I know, such hideous bitches. I almost smiled, but there was a burning in my chest that was spreading up my throat, down my back. Are you sure? I heard myself say. Damon lifted his head from Ash's neck long enough to rake a long, confusing look over me. I think it's obvious if you're wanted here or not. Damon, hissed Dee. Her cheeks red. She turned to me, tears in her eyes. He's not being serious. Are you being serious, Damon? Ash turned in his lap, head cocked to the side. My heart was already pounding in my chest when his eyes met mine. His were sheltered. Actually, I was being serious. He leaned over the table, staring up at me through thick lashes. You're not wanted here. Dee spoke again, but I was beyond hearing. My face felt like it was on fire. People around us were starting to stare. One of the Thompson boys was smirking while the other looked as though he wanted to crawl underneath the table for me. The rest of the kids at the table were staring at their plates. One of them snickered. I'd never been more humiliated in my life. Damon turned away, staring over Ash's shoulder again. Run along, Ash said, flicking her long, slender fingers at me. All the faces staring up at me, a mixture of pity and second-hand embarrassment, threw me back 3 years to the first day I'd returned to school after my dad died. I broke down in English class, crying when I learned we'd be reading A Tale of Two Cities, my dad's favorite story. Everyone had stared at me. Some felt bad, others looked embarrassed for me. It reminded me of the same looks the police and the nurses had given me at the hospital the night I'd been attacked, reminding me of how helpless I'd been. I hated those looks then, and I hated them now. There was no excuse for what I did next, except that I wanted to, needed to. Hands clenching the edges of the plastic tray, I leaned over the table and turned my plate upside down over Damon's and Ash's heads. Chunks of noodles and spaghetti sauce fell. Most of the red gunk hit Ash, and the noodles covered Damon's broad shoulder. One long, stringy noodle slid over Damon's ear and hung there, flopping around. There was an audible gasp that rang throughout the surrounding tables. Dee smacked a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide and full, barely restraining laughter. Shrieking, Ash leaped from Damon's lap, her hands to her sides, palms up. One would think I'd dumped blood on her, considering the horrified look on her face. You, she sputtered, wiping the back of her hand down her sauce-stained cheek. Damon plucked a noodle off his ear and seemed to inspect it before he dropped it on the table. Then he did the oddest thing of all. He laughed. He laughed, a deep, stomach-rumbling kind of laughter that reached his minty eyes and warmed them, causing them to sparkle like his sister's. Ash lowered her hands, balling them into fists. I will end you. Damon jumped up, throwing his arm around the girl's tiny waist. Whatever amusement he felt was long gone. Calm down, he ordered softly. I mean it. Calm down. She pulled against Damon, but didn't make it far. I swear to all the stars and suns, I will destroy you. What does that mean? Are you watching too many cartoons again? I was so over this bitch. I tested the weight of my arm in the splint and seriously thought about hitting someone for the first time in my life. For a second, I swore her eyes started to glow, a bright amber from behind her irises. And then Mr. Garrison was suddenly there, standing at the edge of our table. I believe that's enough. Like a switch being thrown, Ash sat down in her own seat. The edge of her rage dissipated as she eyed me and grabbed a fistful of napkins off the table. Damon slowly picked a clump of long noodles off his shoulder and dropped it on the plate without speaking. I kept expecting him to explode on me, but like his sister, it looked as if he was trying not to laugh again. I think you should find another place to eat, Mr. Garrison said, voice low enough that only people at our table could hear. Do so now. Stunned, I grabbed my book bag and waited for him to tell me to see the principal or for other teachers in the room to intervene, but that never came. Mr. Garrison stared at me. He waited. Then it struck me. He was waiting for me to leave. Like the rest of them were. Nodding numbly, I turned around and walked out of the cafeteria. Eyes followed me, but I kept it together. I didn't break when I heard Dee call out my name, and I didn't break when I passed a dumbfounded-looking Lisa and Carissa. I wasn't going to break. Not anymore. I was tired of this shit. With Damon's, well, whatever she was. I hadn't done a single thing for her to treat me this way. I was done with being pushover Katie. Chapter 13. I'd made a name for myself by the end of the day. I became the girl who dumped all her food on them. I expected backlash in every hallway in class, except when I spotted one of the Thompson boys in my history class, or a freshly clothed Ash sulking by her locker. It never came. Dee apologized profusely before gym class started, and then hugged me for what I did. She tried to talk to me while we were lined up for volleyball, but I was numb. There was no mistaking the fact that Ash hated me. Why? It couldn't be because of Damon. It was more than that. I didn't know what. After school, I drove home, trying to figure out everything that had happened since I moved here. The first day, I'd felt something on the porch and in this house. The day at the lake, Damon had sprouted gills. The flash of light with the bear, and at the library had to be the same, and all that junk Lisa had been saying. Once I got home, though, I saw several packages on my front porch. All the crap from the day disappeared. A few had smiley faces on them. Squealing, I grabbed the boxes. Books were inside. New release books I'd pre-ordered weeks ago. I hurried upstairs and powered up my laptop. Can I just say, how much does it just absolutely make your day when you receive packages? When you've ordered stuff and you receive packages and you've had a horrible day and you're just like, oh my God, my things are here. It's so great. I'm so excited for that feeling. Like, I ordered 10 pairs of shoes and I ordered a bunch of like face products and stuff. That's all going to come in the mail within this week to next week. Super excited for it to make my fucking day. Anyway, I checked on the review I'd posted last night. No comments. People sucked, but I did get 5 new followers. People rocked. I closed out the page before I started redesigning everything. Then I Googled people of light. And after initial results gave me a bunch of Bible study groups, I typed in Mothman. Oh dear God, West Virginians are crazy. Down in Florida, every once in a while, someone claimed to see Bigfoot out in the glades of the Chupacabra, but not a giant flying whatever he was. He looked like a huge satanic butterfly. What in the hell? Why in the hell was I looking at this? It was insane. I stopped myself before I started searching for aliens in West Virginia. As soon as I went downstairs, there was a knock on the door. It was Dee. Hey, she said. Can we talk? Sure. I shut the door behind me and walked outside. Mum's still asleep. She nodded as I sat on the swing. Katie, I'm so sorry about today. Ash is a complete bitch sometimes. It's not your fault she acted that way, I said, meaning it. But I don't get why she and Damon acted like that. I stopped, feeling this stupid burn in my throat. I shouldn't have dumped my food on them, but I've never been more embarrassed in my life. Dee sat beside me, crossing her ankles. I think it was actually kind of funny what you did and not what they did. If I'd known they were going to be so terrible about everything, I would have made sure they didn't. Water under the bridge, I guessed. She drew in a deep breath. Ash isn't Damon's girlfriend. She wants to be, but she's not. It didn't look that way to me. Well, they do hang out. He's using her? Disgusted, I shook my head. What a douche. I think it's mutual on both sides. Honestly, they did date last year for a little bit, but then it cooled off. Today was the most I didn't pay attention to her in months. She hates me, I said after a few minutes, sighing. I don't care about that right now. I wanted to ask you something. Okay, I bit my lip. We're friends, right? Of course. She looked at me with wide eyes. Honestly, Damon scares everyone off, and you've lasted the longest, and well, I think you're like my best friend. I was relieved to hear that. Not the part about me lasting the longest, because that sounded weird, like they broke their friends or something. Same here. She smiled broadly. Good, because I would have felt stupid for saying that if you decided you didn't want to be friends with me anymore. The sincerity in her voice struck a chord with me. Suddenly, I wasn't sure I wanted to question her. Maybe it was something she didn't want to talk about because it was too painful. In the short time I'd known we'd grown close, and I didn't want to upset her. Why did you ask? She prodded. I tugged my hair back, staring at the floor. Why didn't you ever tell me about Dawson? Dee froze. I didn't even think she breathed, to be honest. Then she ran a hand up and down her arm, swallowing. I guess someone told you about him at school. Yeah, they told me he disappeared with a girl. Pressing her lips together, she nodded. I know you probably think this is weird, that I never mentioned him, but I don't like talking about him. I try not to even think about him. She looked at me, eyes glistening with tears. Does that make me a bad person? No, I said fiercely. I try not to think about my dad because it hurts too much sometimes. We were close, me and Dawson. She wiped her hand across her face. Damon was always the quiet one, off doing things on his own, but Dawson and I were super close. We did everything together. He was more than a brother, he was my best friend. I didn't know what to say, but it certainly explained the almost desperate quality to Dee's friendship, and that common feeling we each recognized in the other. Loneliness. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have brought it up. I didn't understand, and I was a nosy bitch. No, it's okay, she twisted toward me. I would be curious too. I totally understand, and I should have told you. I'm such a crappy friend that you find out about my other brother from other kids at school. I was confused. There's been so much, I trailed off, shaking my head. Nothing. When you're ready to talk about him, I'm here, okay? Dee nodded. There's been so much what? Talking to her about the weird crap wouldn't be good. And I'd promised Damon not to talk about the attack. I forced a smile. It's nothing. So, do you think I have to watch my back now, going to the witness protection program? She let out a shaky laugh. Well, I wouldn't try to talk to Ash anytime soon. Figured that much. What about Damon? Good question, she said, glancing away. I have no idea what he'll do. The next day, I was dreading second period. My stomach was twisted, and I'd been unable to eat breakfast without wanting to hurl. There was no doubt in my mind that Damon believed revenge was a dish best served in my face. As soon as Lisa and Carissa arrived at class, they demanded to know what possessed me to dump my plate of spaghetti on Damon and Ash's heads. I shrugged. Ash was being a bitch. I'm sure I seemed like a lot more confident than I felt. I actually wanted to take the whole thing back. Sure, Ash was being rude and embarrassed me, but hadn't I done the same to her? If I was the girl who dumped spaghetti on them, then she was the dumpee, and that's got to be more embarrassing. I was ashamed. I'd never done anything to make anyone feel bad before. It was as though Damon's obnoxious personality was rubbing off on me, and I didn't like it. I decided it would be best for everyone if I stayed the hell away from him from now on. Eyes wide, Lisa leaned across the aisle. And what about Damon? He's always an ass, I told them. Carissa took off her glasses and giggled. I honestly wish I'd known you were going to do that. I would have filmed it. Thinking about that being up on YouTube, I cringed as I watched the door. Rumor around school is you and Damon hooked up over the summer. Lisa seemed to wait for me to confirm this rumor. Not in this lifetime. People are ridiculous. I held their gazes until Carissa coughed and asked, You're going to sit with us today? She put her glasses back on with a push on the bridge, like this. Surprised, I blinked at her. You still want me to sit with you after yesterday? I was figuring I'd be eating my lunches in the restroom for the rest of the day. For the rest of the year, sorry. Lisa nodded. Are you kidding? We think you rock. We don't have any problems with them, but I'm sure there have been a few students who've wanted to do that. And it was pretty badass, Carissa added, grinning. You are like a food ninja. I laughed, relieved. I'd love to, but I'm only here until 4th period. I'm getting my splint off today. Oh, you're going to miss the pep rally, Lisa said. Poor you. Are you going to the game tonight? No, football isn't my thing. Neither is it ours, but you should still go. Lisa popped in her seat, her tight curls bouncing around her heart-shaped face. Chris and I usually go just to get out and do something. There isn't much to do around here. Well, there are field parties after the games. Carissa pushed her bangs out of her glasses. Lisa always drags me to them. Lisa rolled her eyes. Carissa doesn't drink. So? Carissa said. And she doesn't smoke, have sex, or do anything interesting. Lisa dodged out of the way of Carissa's swinging hand. Yawn. Excuse me, I have standards. Her eyes narrowed on Lisa. Unlike some. I have standards. Lisa faced me, a slight grin on her face. But around here, you kind of have to lower them. I started to laugh, and then Damon walked into class. I sunk in my seat, biting my lip. Oh, God. Wisely, both girls stopped talking. I picked up my pen, pretending to be engrossed in the notes I'd taken yesterday. Turned out I hadn't taken many notes, so I wrote the date on my notebook very slowly. Damon took the seat behind me, and my stomach jumped clear into my throat. I was going to vomit, right here, in class, in front. He poked me in the back with his pen. I froze. Him and that goddamn pen. The poke came again, and this time there was a little force behind it. I swung around. My eyes narrowed. What? Damon smiled. Everyone around us was staring. It was like a repeat of lunch. I bet they were wondering if I was going to dump my backpack on his head. Depending on what he said, there was a good chance it could happen. I doubted I'd get away with it this time, though. Tipping his chin down, he stared at me through his wickedly long lashes. You owe me a new shirt. My jaw hit the back of my chair. Come to find out, he continued softly, spaghetti sauce doesn't always come out of clothes. Somehow I found my ability to speak. I'm sure you have enough shirts. I do, but that was my favorite. You have a favorite shirt? I arched a brow. And also, I think you ruined Ash's favorite shirt, too. He started to grin again, flashing a deep dimple in one cheek. Well, I'm sure you were there to comfort her during such a traumatic situation. I'm not sure she'll ever recover, he replied. I rolled my eyes, knowing I should apologize for what I'd done, but I couldn't find it in me. Yeah, I was becoming a terrible person. I started to turn around. You owe me. Again. I stared at him for a long moment. The warning bell rang, but it seemed far away. My chest lurched. I don't owe you anything, I said, low enough for only us to hear. I have to disagree. Leaning closer, he tipped the edge of his desk down. There were only a few inches between our mouths. Totally an inappropriate amount of space, really, since we were in class, and he had a girl on his lap yesterday. You're nothing like I expected. What did you expect? I was sort of turned on by the fact I surprised him. Oh, whoa. Weird. My eyes dropped to his poetic lips. Such a waste of a mouth. You and I have to talk. We have nothing to talk about. His gaze dropped, and the air suddenly felt steamy, unbearable. Yes, he said, voice low. We do. Tonight. Part of me wanted to tell him to forget the whole talking thing, but I gritted my teeth and nodded. We did need to talk, if at least for him to tell me we should never talk again. I went to find the nice Katie he'd gagged and put in the corner. The teacher cleared his throat. Blinking tightly, I saw that we had the entire class transfixed. Flushing to the roots of my hair, I turned around and gripped the edges of my desk. Class began, but the heat in the air was still there, coating my skin in anticipation. I could feel Damon behind me, his eyes on me. I didn't dare move. Not until Lisa stretched beside me and dropped a folded note on my desk. The old... who didn't do that in high school? Class began. Blah, blah, blah. Before the teacher could catch on, I opened the note and slid it under my book. When he turned back to the chalkboard, I lifted the edge of my textbook. Holy hard chemistry, Batman. I looked over at her, shaking my head. But there was a fluttering deep in my chest, breathlessness that shouldn't be there. I didn't like him. He was a jerk, moody. But there had been brief moments that I'd spent with him, like a nanosecond when I thought I might have seen the real Damon, at least a better Damon. And that part made me curious. And the other side, the jerky one, yeah, that part didn't make me curious. It sort of excited me. Yes, gal. Loving this. It's heating up. This is the most reading you've done in years. I'm sorry, I just need to get a drink. Oh, gosh. Ouch. Ouch. I spilled that. Didn't realize it was under so much pressure. Now my hand is sticky. I'm hoping I didn't get any on me. Oh, no, I did. On my shirt. Right, got plenty of shirts. Sorry for the brief intermission. Taking you out of the world. Hello, Bobby. Oh no. Okay. Boop. Oh no, I wet my book. Look at that. That's all right. Chapter 14. I tried paying attention in my classes, but my mind was on Damon and what he wanted to talk to me about tonight. Thankfully, I only had to muscle through half a day before it was time to go get my splint removed. As expected, my arm was completely fine. On the way home, I stopped at the post office. There was a ton of junk mail in our box, but also a few yellow envelopes, which brought a big old smile to my face. Excuse me. Media mail was stamped across them. Gathering my goodies, I headed home and piddled around the house. Piddled around the house. You know what piddled means weeing, so I don't know what she's doing piddling around the house. Anyway, piddled around the house. Anxious energy jolted through my system, and I chugged one of those cheap energy drinks. I chugged one of those stupid energy drinks. I changed several times, settling on a sundress after going through my closet and finding nothing I wanted to wear. Changing didn't get rid of the anxious feeling. What did Damon want to talk about? I ended up rearranging my entire blog design, trying to pass time. And that only made me more anxious about everything, because I was sure I'd screwed up my header and the banner at the bottom. Only when a book release countdown widget had completely disappeared, lost to the realm of the internet, did I force myself away from the computer. Turned out I had a while to wait and see. It was after 8 when Damon showed up at my door, a few minutes after my mum left for Winchester. He was leaning against the railing, staring up at the sky like usual, with the moonlight slicing over half his face, and the rest cast in deep shadows. He didn't seem real. Then Damon zeroed in on me, his gaze sliding over my dress, and then back up. He looked as if he were about to speak, but thought twice. Gathering my courage, I walked over and stopped beside him. Is Dee home? No. He returned to staring at the sky. There are 1,000 twinkling stars. She went to the game with Ash, but I doubt she'll stay long. Damon paused, glancing down at me. I told her I was going to hang out with you tonight. I think she'll come home soon to make sure we haven't killed each other. Looking away, I hid my grin. Well, if you don't kill me, I'm sure Ash will be... if you don't kill me, I'm sure Ash will be more than glad to do so. Because of the spaghetti gate or something else? He asked. I shot him a sidelong look. You looked mighty comfy with her in your lap yesterday. Ah, I see. He pushed off the railing, coming to stand beside me. It makes sense now. It does? I held my ground. His eyes gleamed in the dark. You're jealous. Whatever. I forced a laugh. Why would I be jealous? Damon followed me down the steps until we were standing in my driveway. Because we spent time together. Spending time together isn't a reason to be jealous, especially when you were forced to spend time with me. I realized how lame it was that I was sort of jealous. Ugh. Is this what we need to talk about? He shrugged. Come on, let's walk. Watching him, I smoothed my hands over my dress. It's kind of late, don't you think? I think and talk better when I walk. He held a hand out. He held a hand out to me. If not, I turn into a dickhead Damon you're not very fond of. Ha ha, I stared at his hand. There was a flutter in my stomach. Yeah, I'm not holding your hand. Why not? Because I'm not going to hold hands with you when I don't even like you. Ouch. Damon placed his hand over his chest, wincing. That was harsh. Yeah, he needed better acting classes. You're not going to take me out in the woods again and leave me there, are you? Sounds like a fitting case of revenge, but I wouldn't do that. I doubt you'd last very long without someone to rescue you. Thanks for the vote of confidence. He tossed me a brief grin and went, whoa. And we walked in silence for a few minutes, crossing the main road. The night air was definitely chilly compared to when I'd first put the dress on. I was beginning to wish I'd put tights on too. Fall was well on its way. Soon we had moved deep into the woods, where the moonlight struggled to make it through the thick trees. Damon reached into his back pocket and pulled out a thin flashlight that gave off a surprisingly large amount of light. Every cell in my body seemed to be aware of how close he was, while we walked in a cocoon of darkness, the light bouncing in front of us with each step. And I hated each of my traitorous cells with a vengeance. Ash isn't my girlfriend, he said finally. We used to date, but we're friends now. And before you asked, we're not that kind of friend, even though she was sitting on my lap. I can't explain why she was doing that. Why did you let her? I asked, wanting to smack myself afterward. It wasn't my business, and I didn't care. I don't know, honestly. Is being a good guy a good enough reason? Not really, I said, staring at the ground. I could barely see my feet. Didn't think so, he replied. I couldn't see his expression, and I needed to, because I could never tell what he was thinking, and sometimes, well, his eyes were at war with his words. Anyway, I am sorry about the whole lunch thing. Surprised he apologized, I stumbled over a rock. He caught me easily, his breath warm on my cheek, before he backed off. My skin tingled, but I pulled back. Damon apologizing for the lunch debacle was like being doused with cold water. I wasn't sure what was worse. Him not knowing he'd been a jerk or fully aware of what he'd been doing to me. Kat, he said softly. I glanced at him. You embarrassed me. I know. No, I don't think you do know. I started walking, hugging my elbows. And you pissed me off. I can't figure you out. 1 minute you aren't bad, and then you're the biggest ass on the planet. But I have bonus points. He caught up with me, always shining the light far enough ahead so I could easily make out exposed roots and rocks. I do, right? Bonus points from the lake and I'll walk. Did I get any from saving you that night? You got a lot of bonus points for your sister. I shook my head. Not for me. And if they were my bonus points, you've lost most of them by now. He was quiet for a few moments. That blows. It really does. I stopped. Why are we talking? Look, I'm sorry about that. I am. He let out a long breath. You didn't deserve the way we acted. I didn't know what to say to that. He sounded genuine and almost sad, but it wasn't as if he didn't have a choice in how he acted. Searching for something to say, I settled on what probably wasn't going to take well. I'm sorry about your brother, Damon. He came to a complete stop, nearly hidden in the shadows. There was a long gap in silence. I wasn't sure he'd ever respond. You don't have any idea what happened to my brother. My insides were tight, and all I know is that he disappeared. Damon's hand opened and closed at his side, the other dangling the flashlight straight down. That was a while ago. It was last year. I pointed out gently. Right? Oh yeah, you're right. Just seems longer than that. He looked away, half of his face coming out of the shadows. So, how did you hear about him? I shivered in the chilled air. Kids were talking about it at school. I was curious why no one ever mentioned him. Or that girl. Should we have? He asked. Glancing at him, I tried to gauge his expression, but it was too dark. I don't know. Seems like a pretty big deal that people would talk about. Damon started walking again. It's not something we like to talk about, Kat. That was understandable, I supposed. I struggled to keep up with him. I don't mean to pry. You don't? His voice was tight, movements stiff. My brother is gone. Some poor girl's family will probably never see their daughter again. And you want to know why no one told you? I bit my lip, feeling like a jerk. I'm sorry, it's just that everyone is so secretive. Like, I don't know anything about your family. I've never seen your parents, Damon. And Ash hates my guts for no reason. It's weird that there are two sets of triplets that moved here at the same time. I dumped my food on your head yesterday, and I didn't get in trouble. That's plain weird. Dee has a boyfriend she never mentioned. The town, it's odd. People stare at Dee like she's either a princess or they're afraid of her. People stare at me, and you sound like those things have something in common. I could barely keep up with him. We were moving deeper into the woods, almost near the lake by now. Do they? Why would they? His voice was low and taut with frustration. Maybe you're feeling a little paranoid. I would be if I'd been attacked after moving to a new town. See, you're doing it now, I pointed out, getting all uptight because I'm asking a question. And Dee does the same thing. Do you think maybe it's because we know you've been through a lot and we don't want to add to it? But how can you add to it? He slowed his pace. I don't know. We can't. I shook my head as he stopped near the edge of the lake and flipped off the flashlight in the night. Flipped off the flashlight. In the night, the water gleamed like shiny onyx. 100 stars reflected off the still surface of like the night sky, but less infinite. It seemed as if I could reach out and touch them. Bedate the lake, Damon said after a few moments. There were a few minutes when I was having a good time. My breath caught hearing that. There were a few minutes that I enjoyed it too. I tucked my hair back. Before you turned into Aquaman? Damon was quiet, his shoulders unnaturally tense. Stress will do that, make you think things are happening that aren't. Looking at him, his striking features, lit by the pale moonlight, he didn't seem real. The exotic eyes, the curve of his jaw, all of it seemed more defined out here. Damon stared at the dark sky, a brooding and pensive look to his face. No, it doesn't, I said finally. There is something odd here. Other than you, he said. Several responses lined up, but I pushed them away. Arguing him in the middle of the woods at night wasn't on the top of my list of things to do. Why did you want to talk, Damon? He clasped a hand around the back of his neck. What happened yesterday at lunch is only going to get worse. You can't be friends with Dee, not like the kind of friend you want to be. A hot flush crawled down my cheeks, spreading over my neck. Are you serious? Damon lowered his head. I'm not saying you have to stop talking to her, but pull it back. You can still be nice to her, talk to her at school, but don't go out of your way. You're only going to make it harder on her and yourself. Every hair on my body rose at once. Are you threatening me, Damon? Our eyes locked. His were full of, what, regret? No, I'm telling you how it's going to be. We should head back. No, I dug in, staring at him. Why? Why is it wrong if I'm friends with your sister? A second paused. His jaw tensed. You shouldn't be out here. He drew in a harsh... You shouldn't be out here. You shouldn't be out here with me. He drew in a harsh breath, his eyes wide. He took a step forward. A warm breeze kicked up, scattering falling leaves and tossing my hair back. The gust seemed to come from behind Damon, almost as if it were fueled by his mounting anger. You aren't like us. You are nothing like us. Dee deserves better than you, people that are like her. So leave me alone, leave my family alone. It was a smack in the face, only worse. Out of everything I was expecting him to say, he went for a doozy. I drew in a deep breath, but it hitched in my throat. I took a step back, blinking away the rush of angry tears. Damon didn't take his eyes off me. You wanted to know why? That's why. I swallowed thickly. Why do you hate me so much? For a brief second, the mask cracked. The pain contorted his features. It was so quick, I couldn't be sure I'd actually seen it. He didn't answer. The tears building in my eyes were about to spill down from my cheeks. I refused to cry in front of him, to give him that kind of power. You know what? Screw you, Damon. He looked away. Cat, you can't... Shut up, I hissed. Just shut up. I headed around Damon and started walking. My skin felt hot and cold. My insides burned with fire and ice. I was going to cry. I knew it. That was what the choking feeling was in the back of my throat. Cat, Damon called out. Please wait up. I picked up my pace until I was almost running. Come on, Cat. Don't walk so far ahead. You're going to get lost. At least take the flashlight. As if he cared. I wanted to be free of him before I lost it. There was a good chance I'd hit him or I'd cry, because whether I liked him or not, what he said hurt. Like there was something wrong with me. I stumbled over a few branches and rocks on the ground I couldn't see, but I knew I could find my way back to the road, and I could hear him behind me, his feet snapping twigs as he kept up with me. Raw hurt opened up in my chest. I stomped ahead, needing to get home, to call Mum and somehow convince her that we need to move, like tomorrow. Run away. My hands curled into fists. Why should I run away? I hadn't done anything wrong. Angry and disgusted with myself, I tripped over a root sticking out of the ground. I nearly fell flat on my face. I grumbled. Cat! Damon cursed from behind me. I gained my footing and rushed forward, relieved to see the road up ahead. I nearly broke into a dead run. I could hear his footfalls now echoing in the distance. I reached the road, wiping the back of my hands over my face. Shit, I was crying. Damon yelled, but his voice was drowned out by the twin headlights of a truck racing towards me. No more than 50 feet away. I was too shocked to move. It was going to hit me. God, this girl just gets herself into trouble. She's about to get hit by a truck. Chapter 15, and then we will chill out for a bit. Chapter 15. A loud crack of thunder, only more powerful, reverberated through the valley. It was like a sonic blast that shook me to my very core. There was no time for the driver to see me or to stop. I threw up my arms as if they could somehow protect me. The truck's loud roar filled my ears. I braced myself for the bone-shattering impact. My last thought of my mum and what my mangled body was going to do to her. But the impact never came. I could have kissed the bumper. It was that close. My hands mere inches from the hot grill. Slowly, I lifted my head. The driver sat motionless behind the wheel, eyes wide and empty. He didn't move, didn't blink. I wasn't even sure he was breathing. A cup of coffee was in his right hand, frozen halfway to his mouth. Frozen. Everything was frozen. A metallic taste filled the corners of my mouth. My mind balked. The engine was still running, roaring in my face. I turned from the frozen driver to see Damon. He seemed to be concentrating, his breathing heavy, and his hands were clenched at his sides. And his beautiful eyes were different. Wrong. I took another step back, now out of the path of the truck. My hand held in front of me, as if to ward him from coming close to me. Oh my God, I whispered, my already pounding heart faltering for a mere beat. Damon's eyes glowed iridescent in the dark, lit from the inside. The light seemed to be growing more intense, and his fist started to shake, the trembling moving up his arms until his entire body seemed to be reverberating in tiny, minuscule waves. And then Damon began to fade out, his body, along with his clothes, disappearing and being replaced by an intense reddish-yellow light that swallowed him whole. People made of light. Holy crap. Time seemed to stop. No, time had already stopped. Somehow he kept that truck from hitting me, stopped a 7-ton truck from surely breaking every bone in my body with what? A word? A thought? So much power. It caused the air to vibrate around us unnaturally. The ground shivered under his sheer strength. I knew if I had tried hard enough, I could reach down and feel it quake. In the distance, I heard Dee, confusion pouring from her voice, calling to us. How had she found us? Right. Damon was lighting up the entire street. He was that bright. I looked back to the truck and saw that not only was it shaking, but the driver was too. It was trying to break past the invisible barrier that seemed to hold it frozen in time. The metal beast shuddered and the engine screamed, the driver's foot still on the gas pedal. I ran, not out of the road, but beyond that. I vaguely heard the truck howl past me. I ran up the twisting road that led to our houses, nestled in the mouth of nowhere. I briefly saw Dee running up to me before I dodged her. I only knew she had to be like him. What were they? They weren't human. What I saw was not possible. No human could do that. No human could stop a truck on command, stay underwater for several minutes, or fade in and out. All the strange things I'd been noticing seemed to make sense now. I continued to run, past my driveway, having no idea where I was running or why. My brain wasn't working. Instinct had taken over. Branches ripped at my hair at the pretty dress I'd worn. I tripped over a large rock, but I pushed myself from my knees and kept moving. Suddenly, there were footsteps racing behind me. Someone called out to me, but I didn't stop, pushing faster into the dark woods ahead of me. I was not thinking at this point. I only wanted to get away. A curse sounded from behind me, and then a hard body crashed into me. I went down, surrounded in warmth. Somehow, he managed to cushion the brunt of the fall with his own body by twisting in midair. Then he rolled me under him, pinning me. I pushed his chest and tried to kick him. None of it worked. I closed my eyes, too afraid to see if his eyes still held the eerie glow. Get off! Damon grabbed my shoulders, shaking me gently. Stop it! Get away from me! I screamed to him, trying to inch away, but he held me down. Cat, stop it! He yelled again. I'm not going to hurt you. How could I believe him? Some small part of my brain was still thinking, reminded me that he had saved my life. I stopped thrashing. Damon stood above me. I won't hurt you, Cat. His tone was softer, but still laced with fury, as he tried to control me without doing any real damage. I could never hurt you. His words made my stomach quiver. Something inside me answered. I believed him, even as my mind rebelled at the idea. I didn't know what part of me was that foolish, but it seemed to be the part winning. My breath still rough. I tried to calm down. He loosened his hold on me, but he still loomed above. His breath was ragged against my cheek. Pulling back, Damon put a finger under my chin to turn my face to him. Look at me, Cat. You need to look at me right now. I kept my eyes closed. I didn't want to know his eyes were still freaky. Damon shifted up, moving his hands from my shoulders to my cheeks. I should have made my escape then, but the moment his warm hands touched my cheeks, I couldn't move. Carefully, his fingers smoothed over my face. Please. His voice lost its furious edge. Letting out a shaky breath, I opened my eyes. His gaze searched mine. His eyes were still that strange, intense green. But they were his, not the ones I'd seen minutes before. The pale light of the moon broke through the trees above, slowly sliding over his high cheekbones, bouncing off his parted lips. I'm not going to hurt you, he said again softly. I want to talk to you. I need to talk to you. Do you understand? I nodded, unable to make my throat work. He closed his eyes briefly, a soul-wrenching sigh escaping his lips. Okay, I'm going to let you up, but please promise me you won't run. I don't feel like chasing you anymore right now. That last little trick nearly wiped me out. He paused, waiting for my answer. His face did look tight with fatigue. Say it, Cat. Promise me you won't run. I can't let you run out here by yourself. Do you understand? Yes, I barely croaked out. Good. He slowly let go and leaned back, his left hand moving down my cheek in a small gesture he seemed unaware of. I remained frozen on the ground until he crouched on his heels. Under his weary gaze, I scooted away until my back was against a tree. Once he'd seemed satisfied that I wouldn't take off, he sat in front of me. Why did you have to walk in front of that truck? He asked, but didn't wait for an answer. I was trying everything to keep you out of this, but you had to go and ruin all of my hard work. I didn't do it on purpose, I raised a trembling hand to my forehead. But you did, he shook his head. Why did you come here, Cat? Why? We were doing well, and then you show up, and everything is thrown to hell. You have no idea. Shit, I thought we'd get lucky and you'd leave. I'm sorry, I'm still here. Pulling my legs away from him, I tucked them under my chest. I'm always making this worse. He shook his head, looking as if he wanted to curse again. We're different. I think you realize that now. I rested my forehead against my knees. I took a moment to gather what I had left of my thoughts and lifted my head. Damon, what are you? He smiled ruefully, rubbed his head with the heel of his palm. That is hard to explain. Please tell me. You need to tell me, because I'm about to lose it again. I warned him. I wasn't lying. The control that I obtained started to slip the longer he was silent. Damon's gaze was intense as he spoke. I don't think you want to know, Cat. His expression, his voice, was so sincere they filled me with a deep sense of dread. I knew whatever he was going to tell me was going to change my life forever. Once I learned what he and his family were, I could never take it back, never go back. I would be inexplicably changed. Even knowing all that, I'd already passed the point of no return. The old Katie would be running again, I'm sure of it. She'd rather pretend none of this happened. But I was different now, and I had to know. Are you human? Damon's short laugh was without humor. We're not from around here. You think? His brows rose. Yeah, I guess you probably figured that we're not. I guess you probably figured out that we're not human. I took a shaky breath. I was hoping I was wrong. He laughed again, but there was very little humor in his voice. No, we're from far, far away. My stomach dropped to my toes. My arms around my legs tightened. What do you mean by far, far away? Because I'm suddenly seeing visions of the beginning of Star Wars. Damon stared at me hard. We're not from this planet. Okay, there. He said what I'd pretty much already figured out was the truth, but that told me nothing. What are you, a vampire? He rolled his eyes. Are you serious? What? Frustration whipped through me. You say you're not human, and that limits the pool of what you can be. You stopped a truck without touching it. You read too much. Damon exhaled slowly. We're not werewolves or witches, zombies, or whatever. Well, I'm glad about the zombie thing. I'd like to think what's left of my brains are safe. I muttered. And I don't read too much. There's no such thing as that, but there's no such thing as aliens either. Damon leaned forward quickly, placing his hands on my bent knees. I froze at his touch. My senses ran hot and cold at once. His stare penetrated me, locked me into him. In this vast, never-ending universe, do you think Earth, this place, is the only planet with life? No, I stammered. So that kind of stuff, that's normal for your... Hell, what do you call yourselves? He leaned his head back. As the seconds skipped by, and my heart doubled its beats in wait for his answer. He seemed to be wrestling with how much to tell me, and I was pretty sure whatever it might be, I wasn't going to like it. And that brings us up to chapter 16, which is where we will stop today. I hope you guys found that mildly entertaining. And we'll pick this back up again tomorrow evening. That was fun. Thank you for hanging around and listening to me read my teen paranormal novella. And I will see you guys again soon. Bye.